So, our next speaker is Yara Moussa. Yara is a researcher and program manager with over a decade of experience in social justice, conservation, and sustainability across the MENA region and the UK. She will share insights from her research on the emerging animal advocacy movement in Egypt, highlighting key challenges, opportunities, and recommendations for sustainable growth.
Hi everyone, my name is Yara and I am a research specialist working at the intersection of social development and conservation, and one of the authors that contributed to the research being presented today, titled The Landscape of Animal Advocacy in Egypt: Insights into Stray Wildlife and Farmed Animal Rights. This research was commissioned and conducted by Ethical Seafood Research. ESR is an organization that focuses on capacity building research and policy change with the aim of improving the lives of aquatic animals in Africa and globally, and their current projects are in Egypt, Zanzibar, and Kenya. Our research that we're presenting today examines the wider landscape of animal advocacy in Egypt, a nascent and growing field. We've observed the current lack of data on the topic, and so our research hopes to address this critical knowledge gap. We also synthesize data and research findings focusing on stray, wild, and farmed animals, and analyze current practices and trends in each of these subgroups. We try to highlight the challenges and opportunities facing the growth of the animal advocacy movement through these lenses. Our findings also highlight priority areas for impactful advocacy efforts, and we propose recommendations, which we will show at the end of the presentation, for the growth of the movement, ensuring it's integrated into local and social practices. So the methodology we used entailed conducting a desk-based literature search to find animal advocacy-related reports, publications, and organizations that are active in Egypt. We also conducted interviews with organizations working with stray animals, working animals, and wild animals to better understand the current state of their work in the field and to get a better understanding of the challenges that they face. It's important to note that this sample is unlikely to represent the entire animal advocacy organizations that work in Egypt, although they do offer very valuable insights into common experiences and trends. Information about the Egyptian economy might be helpful here. Egypt is one of Africa's largest economies and most densely populated countries, with a human population that is expected to surpass 160 million by 2050. So the skyrocketing rate of urbanization, coupled by a persistent demand for food and shelter and fuel, in addition to rapidly increasing external debt and vulnerability to global market fluctuations, the economy faces mounting pressures on its resources. A major geographical feature of the region is the Nile Delta and the Nile River. The Nile provides around 97% of the country's freshwater needs, while the Delta accounts for over 50% of its economic activity, primarily through agricultural work. Agriculture and agribusinesses are the country's largest employers, employing between a quarter and a third of the population. As for the types of animals in Egypt, they fall into various categories or uses, and those are farmed animals, working animals, stray animals, and wild animals. Animals used in entertainment and for scientific research are unfortunately also prevalent, yet none of the organizations we interviewed worked with these types of animals directly, and so we'll be focusing on those during our discussion today. So taking a quick look at farmed animals, those include cattle, sheep, and poultry. As you can see from this graph, poultry production has actually seen a significant increase in the last few years, while challenges continue to face cattle and sheep production, and this is mainly due to increased feed costs, which are particularly burdensome for small and medium-sized farms that make up about 70% of animal husbandries in the country. Water scarcity that we've discussed before in the Nile region also poses challenges to the sheep and cattle sectors. The government does hope to expand industrialized agriculture with particular focus on poultry, and there are proposals to increase chicken production numbers up to 2 billion by 2030 and to double the number of eggs produced in that same time frame. So aquatic farmed animals tell a bit of a different story. Total fish production currently stands at around 2 million tons, which for those not so familiar with fisheries and aquaculture is a very significant volume. It's a number that's projected to continue to grow, as you can see in the figure here on the left. Egypt is currently the top producer of fish in Africa and the 6th largest producer on a global scale. It's also the 3rd largest producer of Nile tilapia globally. So the vast majority of that production comes from aquaculture, which you can see as the red line for fisheries here is relatively small, and most of that production is the farming of Nile tilapia. Most of the aquaculture production is centered around the Nile Delta, which you can see in the image on the top right, and most of that production is carried out in ponds, which you can see as an example of in the image below on the right. And although the sector has seen significant growth, climate change-induced water scarcity, again, is projected to have a substantial negative impact on water levels and on Egypt's agri-food production. So Egypt has an estimated 1.7 million working animals, including donkeys, mules, and horses, and they work in transportation and in tourism, often under grueling conditions. As for stray animals, recent estimates say that there are anywhere from 15 to 50 million stray dogs, with many more stray cats. There is a bit of a stigma towards the stray population in Egypt, although we've seen this trend change a little bit over the last few years. Egypt is also home to a diversity of wild animals, including 13,000 fish species, over 470 bird species, and over 200 species of mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. Unfortunately, rescue operations are not always easy to conduct, and they require a high level of coordination between a number of different bodies, which is not always easy to guarantee or secure. Our research and findings show that the majority of the animal advocacy groups operating in Egypt actually work with the stray animal population. This is followed by working animals and then followed by wild animals. So here we'll discuss quickly some of our key findings. Data from our interviews and discussions with those working in the field point to the lack of funding, actually, as the #1 challenge for many of the participants. Some participants expressed how difficult it is to raise funds due to the low cultural receptivity towards animal advocacy. Also, when grants are available, they're not always helpful for the day-to-day running costs, as they tend to be structured around a one-off project. So as one participant put it, "I feed my dogs with £500,000 Egyptian pounds. This is where I need the money, so I don't need money for specific projects." Our data also highlighted the fact that the international funding ecosystem often fails to align with local needs, as donor funding mechanisms may not provide the agility and flexibility that local organizations require for daily necessities. Legislative efforts were also another key finding. Several advocacy organizations have proposed new legislation aimed at improving animal welfare, yet they draft laws that are often refused. One participant spoke of how politicians are reluctant to prioritize new animal welfare laws due to the overwhelming economic and social concerns that the country faces, and so it's currently seen as less of a priority. And this is seen and is reflected by the minimal legislative support observed to date. Finally, social and cultural initiatives and educational initiatives have been highlighted as particularly promising in both our interviews and our desk-based research, and this is likely closely related to the importance of interpersonal interactions and how it brings out the localized knowledge that actually exists locally. During our research, we also found that low cultural receptivity to animal welfare is particularly apparent with farmed animals, where most people only focus on sort of the physical needs of animals with little regard to their psychological well-being. However, Animal Advocacy Africa has produced a report arguing for farmed animals to be a top priority for advocacy efforts within the African continent, and we find that this applies to Egypt in many ways. So, first of all, We found that the rising costs of feed and production, combined with the increased costs that the consumers have to bear, have actually caused a recent lull in the expansion of industrialized agriculture. It is therefore a potentially ideal time to consider plant-based alternatives and to establish benchmarks for animal welfare before the industry experiences exponential growth. We also found that concern for infectious diseases after COVID and the rise of avian influenza make this an opportune time to draw the focus on the impacts of industrialized agriculture on human health and sort of bring out the One Health approach more strongly. There's also an opportunity to scale institutional outreach by supporting farmer networks. This could work well in Egypt, considering the high numbers of small-scale farms in the country. And finally, the growing popularity of animal welfare, especially for stray animals, as mentioned, could potentially help the growth of the animal welfare movement also for farmed animals. Finally, we thought it would be good to sort of present top-line recommendations from our research. Based on our research, we found that supporting small-scale farmers could promote high animal welfare practices and foster a more ethical and sustainable farming model. Advocating for funding shifts to move away from rigid project-based models towards ones that promote sustainable and adaptable funding solutions that are tailored to the unique challenges faced by animal advocates, particularly shelters and other wildlife rescue organizations. We also found that promoting plant-based alternatives will help support human well-being and also contribute to improving farmed animal welfare by reducing reliance on animal agriculture. Institutional capacity building by strengthening the understanding of the One Health framework, which emphasizes the interconnectedness of animal, human health, and the environment. And focusing on youth-centered educational campaigns, which are designed and implemented for children and young people, empowering them with the skills to advocate for animal welfare. We've noticed that children and younger generations have more of an understanding of animal welfare and receptivity to it. Finally, integrating animal welfare into larger environmental advocacy projects rather than treating them as separate initiatives, which could open up more diverse funding opportunities, essential for building the animal advocacy space. Finally, we find that by highlighting the connections between the animal welfare movement and the various crises of climate, biodiversity, and health, advocates may be able to push for policies that promote better welfare through a wider environmental lens. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to having a discussion and hearing all your questions and thoughts.
Thank you so much, Yara. That was wonderful. So we do have 1 minute for some questions. We do have one from Olga. So Yara, would you please be able to speak to or elaborate more on how cultural and social contexts impact the advocacy movement in Egypt?
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for this question. I think it's a really good one. I think the social and cultural aspect kind of actually defines the trajectory at which certain movements, especially new movements, can start to propel forward. So I think it's really important to focus on this particular aspect. When we mentioned the social and cultural aspect, we were talking about several things really, and I think one point that I kind of want to pull out from some of our findings is the role of religious discourse. So Egypt is a majority Muslim country, and there are some sort of rules and ways in which where religious discourse actually asks for the humane treatment of animals. A lot of these sorts of religious principles and teachings kind of get lost, you know, in our day-to-day lives. And so one of the things that we thought would be helpful actually is to try and reposition religious discourse and kind of bring it to the fore a little bit, because people do have a high propensity to listen to, accept, and sort of tune in to religious teachings that would actually help in sort of solidifying some of these animal welfare concepts. So in trying to work essentially with the local culture and the social context to help move this discussion a bit more forward, and make sure that it's done in a positive manner, highlighting some of the problems with dealing with animals only as a source of food, for example, rather than sentient beings, which is something that is, heralded by religious teachings and so on. I think another point is the how we integrate and interact with younger generations. So, as I mentioned in the presentation, we've seen sort of an uptick in how people are reacting to animal welfare issues more widely. So specifically, we're talking about stray animals, working animals, sort of the animals that people see on a day-to-day basis on the street every day, and the extent to which a lot of new groups, especially younger people, are sympathizing with the cause of animal welfare through the lens of wild animals and stray animals and working animals. And so what we're advocating for here is to continue integrating younger people into these discussions, because the sensibility to animal welfare is increasing, and therefore the sensibility towards increasing farmed animal welfare is therefore there's a high opportunity for this conversation to be taken forward as well. So it's important to really look at overall the cultural context. It makes sense to also look at the economic context, just to make sure that we're not asking people to do things that they're unable to do or that are irrelevant to them. So if half the population, for example, isn't able to afford meat, then it wouldn't really, it would kind of not make a lot of sense to direct that message to that part of the population. So we're talking about, certain groups that are engaged, certain institutions like educational and religious institutions that can really help engage younger people specifically.
Thank you so much, Yara. Go room with all of the speakers from this session.